Please pray with me. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, for you are our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Theologian Ian Markham tells a story about visiting the holy monastery of the Transfiguration of Jesus Christ in Greece. It's one of six monasteries built in the 15th century on top of a mountain there. Now, there are only two options to reach the top of that mountain. One is by climbing long hand-woven ladders that hang from the side of the mountain, and the other is by riding in a suspended hand-woven basket, which is pulled to the top by several monks. Either way, it's a terrifying journey due to the height and the cliffs. On this particular day, Markham and another tourist decided to ride the basket to the top of the mountain. The tourist who was with Markham became anxious about halfway up, especially after she noticed that the ropes by which the basket was suspended were old and frayed. With a trembling voice, she asked the monk who was in the cart with them, "Out of curiosity, how often do you happen to change the ropes?" The monk thought for a moment and replied calmly, "Whenever they break." Though both of them made it safely to the top of that mountain and back down again, I doubt very seriously that either Markham or that woman would ever ride in that basket again. Fear has a way of holding us prisoner, of paralyzing us and keeping us from being able to act with confidence and courage in challenging situations. That's the point that Jesus makes in our gospel text today. We're in the final hours of Jesus' life in this passage from Matthew's gospel, in the time just before his arrest and crucifixion. They have left, Jesus and the disciples have left the temple, and it's just them. The religious leaders are no longer in the picture. It's just Jesus and the disciples now, and he shared with them some of the most difficult and demanding teachings yet, warning them that a time is coming when they will be faced with great danger for their convictions and their compassion. Jesus has promised that they will not face these threats alone, for God will be with them and they will be given the strength to endure all that comes. They will see the reign of God coming in all its glorious fullness, but when it first arrives, it won't always be obvious. That's why Jesus tells them they must stay alert and watchful, for those signs of the realm of God will be the foundation on which their hope, the hope that will sustain them, can be built. And now Jesus tells this story of a wealthy employer who entrusts vast sums of money to employees and then leaves on an extended vacation. The employer doesn't tell the employees what to do with the money, only giving it to them to steward during the employer's absence. This isn't just a small amount of money either. What we hear of as bags of gold, those were talents, and a talent was worth 15 years of wages for an average worker in that day. The equivalent to us might be hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of dollars. The first employee is apparently the most trusted and receives 5 talents, and the second employee receives 2. Both take that money and invest it, doubling those sums. They are creative and courageous and confident in their use of what has been entrusted to them. The third employee, fearful of the employer, takes the 1 talent entrusted and buries it in the ground, afraid of losing it and being held accountable upon the return of the employer. The employer, of course, does hold the employee accountable while celebrating the actions of the first two. Now, on the surface, we're inclined to hear this story and think it's about material resources entrusted to our care or the spiritual gifts we've been given. And there's a sense of that, but neither is entirely accurate. Yes, God does expect us to be good stewards of what we have, living simply and sharing all that we have with those who are in need and using what we have to make the world a better place. But at the end of the story, though, we're troubled because God doesn't take from those who have little and give to those who have much. As Jesus has taught us throughout the Gospel of Matthew, God's way of working in the world is exactly the opposite. This isn't about money. God also doesn't take the gifts for service one has and give them to another. This isn't entirely about gifts either. This is about faith. The first two employees trusted their employer and acted with courage and confidence and creativity. The employer celebrates them for it. The third employee, the one who receives one talent, cowers in fear, afraid of what will happen, unable or unwilling to trust the employer to be fair and just upon return. What is taken from the employee is what little faith or trust was left, because you see, the relationship has been broken beyond repair. That's why the employee is shown the door. Now, with all of Jesus' stories, we should be careful not to interpret it literally. The story is meant to teach us a lesson, to encourage us to act with faith. For acting on trust deepens our relationship with God and with each other. It helps to build our faith. In his book Radical Grace, theologian and mystic Richard Rohr writes, "The greatest enemy of faith is not doubt. The greatest enemy of faith is fear. Most of the world is controlled by fear, petty and big. Petty fears control people, great fears control nations. We could feed all the people in the world if we would stop building arms, but we are afraid." In the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said, "Those of you who make peace will be happy. You will be God's own." Rohr continues, "Yet even Christians are preoccupied with fear and protecting ourselves because we don't believe what Jesus said." The Sermon on the Mount is an antidote to fear, but we have never seen fear as the crucial issue. No, we've seen it to be doubt. Everything that's going on in the world right now, the pandemic, the economic crisis, the uncertainty, we can feel at times like these that we are living through those terrible times described by the prophet Zephaniah. But Paul's words from 1 Thessalonians continue to remind us that we live on this side of Easter, knowing that Christ has overcome all the powers of evil and fear and death in this world. And that realization, Paul urges, should help us to overcome any doubts that we have and to live as children of courage and conviction. 60 years ago this week, in fact, 60 years ago yesterday, Ruby Bridges taught the world how to be brave. She was only 6 years old when she walked through masses of protesters threatening her life and the life of her family as she made her way into the William Franz Elementary School on November 14th, 1960, to become the first and only Black student in an all-white school in New Orleans, Louisiana. When Bridges walked into her first grade classroom that day, she was alone with the teacher. All the other students had been withdrawn from by their parents. For the rest of the school year, it would be just Ruby and her teacher. But she didn't give up. Not then, not ever. But that didn't mean she didn't feel fear. Those were the days I distinctly remember being really, really frightened, she says. Yet something kept her going. Even when her parents lost their jobs and local stores and businesses refused them service, none of them was willing to back down from doing what they knew to be right. Norman Rockwell captured Bridges' heroism in The Problem We All Live With, that iconic painting that shows the young girl being escorted into school by U.S. Marshals. When Bridges was invited to the White House in 2011 to meet then President Barack Obama, he told her pointedly, "Without you, I wouldn't be here." The courage of that 6-year-old girl changed the world. What might our courage be able to do? Biblical scholar Verna Hollyhead has written, "Discipleship is not just a comfortable holding on to the gifts that God has given us. It's challenging to us. It challenges us to action, to risk-taking, to increasing the yield of good works and sharing these with others, and to refraining from our excuses for failures." But lest we think that we can only show courage in grand gestures, Hollyhead continues, "The risks that earn us affirmation as good and trustworthy servants are the ordinary kingdom exchanges of everyday life." Where might we show courage in our lives today? Maybe it's in forgiving someone who wronged us. Maybe it's in showing compassion to someone who we think doesn't deserve it. Maybe it's in wearing a mask. Perhaps it's by refraining from gathering in person with family and friends during the holidays. Where might we show courage in speaking up and standing with and amplifying the voices of those often silenced or forgotten? Jesus' promise to us in this parable is that those who show courage will find courage. Those who act on trust will build trust. The reign and rule of God comes into being when we put one foot in front of another, even in the face of all our anxieties and uncertainties, and do the best we can in the moment. God honors those steps, however faltering, and blesses them. Amen. Our song of response is "When Peace Like a River." Let us join our hearts